I should have done that 5 minutes ago, but I've already talked about this, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, and then the Manuscript Review Subcommittee, or MARS, because I could, is intended to be our quality bar for things we present or publish. And so it's intended to be a multidisciplinary group of investigators in the network that provide a peer review of journal-ready manuscripts. So the idea is not to delay things greatly. We've said internally we think we should always be able to do this in 3 weeks, but we want to give ourselves 6 weeks, and it's a focus on scientific quality and maintenance of the CPRN brand for high-quality multi-center research. And what the way this has been used in other networks is it really should reduce the number of questions and issues that come from the editors of the journal that's submitted to. It should just improve the quality. So this should be viewed as a constructive step and not something to slow things down. And again, this will be yet another subcommittee that people have terms on to sort of share the workload. And again, this will probably take, since it's manuscript, will probably take a little bit of time before it's needed, but we do expect to have 2 manuscripts this year, both the Research CP manuscript and the sort of founding of CPRN manuscript, so we may need to invoke before too long. So any questions about that? Okay, so here is the big kahuna, the research concept development, which is Chapter 4 in your SOPs. And there's a lot more detail in the SOPs, but we'll see what this generates. So the idea is to give you guidance to say, well, okay, I want to study something. How do I go about getting a study up and running? And what is the opportunity for outside investigators to potentially submit a study concept that could be moved to a research protocol? And so for those of you that are familiar with HCRN, this is a little different because HCRN is very much so focused on purely the academic advancement of the 18 or 19 PIs that are part of that network, and there is the only thing that another outside PI can possibly do is partner with a study PI to get a study done. But it's far more on the invitation only, like it was considered for one study when studying Ben Warp's, at the time, relatively new way of doing shunt surgery. So so CPRN has been founded much more under the direction of we are trying to make 1,000 flowers bloom. We want to both honor the work of everyone working on the registry as getting sort of first dibs, but we also don't want to miss out on great research opportunities. So this is not only how you propose studies, but this is also the gate by which an outsider could consider asking to partner with CPRN, potentially becoming a site with CPRN and having a study get executed. So it starts with an investigator requesting to do a concept review, and the initial review is just the executive committee saying, yeah, this fits. This is not an approval. This is a gate to be able to present a 2-page concept to the investigator committee. And so it's really assessing the importance of the research question and how well the study question fits with CPRN. So Michael Kruer's study question was very interesting because it's not a perfect fit, but there was a way to make a connection that made sense. You could envision a question that's born out of neonatology that's critical to CP and is a clinical research question, where we may say, oh, well, let's figure out how we can partner with our NICUs to do this, or we may say, we really just don't have a mechanism to get there from here. This really needs to be studied in another mechanism. So this is really, the EC is just going to say, are we ready at this time to take on this concept, to even consider it? And then also see where it fits against the research CP agenda that we are going to publish this fall, and I'll send out details shortly. So that's the concept. I'm going to go through. Let me see if people have questions about that before I go through the flow chart on how that will work. Okay. So the idea is a project's initiated by a CPRN site PI, and the reason why I say a site PI is I'm envisioning that even if it's an external person, they're going to have a connection with someone that's on the investigator team that's going to kind of say this is how we work and be a little bit of the knowledge source to say to make the introduction, and so and the idea is so initially between the SRS chair and the EC we say, yeah, this concept's worth us considering, and so we have in the SOPs a recommendation for a 2-page concept, and we describe the details, and so you can look at the kinds of things that we're asking for there. The investigator would develop that, and then we would schedule that investigator in to present, much like Michael Kruer presented, to the investigators, although we'll have to have a mechanism by which that is, because of just the timing of calls, it's hard to get a quorum of or anywhere near a majority of the investigators. Will have a mechanism by which that can be reviewed and a voting mechanism following that. But if there is a 70% or greater approval, the concept and the investigator are invited to move that along to become a preliminary protocol or grant, and they get connected to consult with the Data Coordinating Center and the Scientific Review Subcommittee. If they get a vote that is between 50 and 69%, that's kind of like the A1 on a concept. They're allowed to revise it and bring it back to the investigator committee at a future time. And if they get less than a 50% approval, we're just kind of saying, this is really not of interest to the investigators in the network, and given that the way data is going to be collected is site investigators are going to be interested, we want to make sure that we're not ending up conducting a set of studies that there's not broad buy-in. So we will say if that concept doesn't make that bar, that we're not going to reconsider it. So that's the rough approval of the first phase of saying I've got a concept and I'm going to get some feedback, and it's either going to be allowed to be moved along to a full grant. So think of the work effort that's associated with what we did for the Kary grant. We know that we can't really be doing that over and over again, so this is a way to give us a mechanism at the beginning of the funnel to filter, and then you'll see the next stages of the filter before we ever are actually doing the heavy lifting of submitting something as big as that, a 23-center trial that we were submitting. So any questions on this initial flow? I've never been so clear in my whole life. That or it's just clear as mud. Go ahead, Marcia.
I guess the question is, are we anticipating, how are other people, other than people within the CPRN, are we anticipating, I guess from your history with the hydrocephalus, other people outside of this group submitting research concepts? Where are we anticipating these are coming from? I would assume from
I think the preponderance will come internally. That's what I expect. And also the view of this network is actually to enable many sites to participate in the registry and to potentially participate in the research. So because the bar is fairly high, as any of you can describe, from just getting the protocol approved, or if you're actually doing the forms, there's a fair amount of buy-in. The network's not going to get arbitrarily large because you got to be truly committed. And one of the things we've always said with HCRN that's really interesting is we'll have all these sites that say, oh, we really want to be part of HCRN, we really want to be part, and then we put out a request for application for an expansion of the network, and we say, here's a 3-page application that you need to do. And of 20 sites that have expressed interest, 6 will actually do the application, and that's just the application. So I do think that, more are in the boat than are out of the boat, but I think there are some, like Texas Children's as an example. Alicia Schwabe they've downloaded the forms, they're working on the IRB. UT Houston is doing the same. They've actually already submitted the IRB protocol. I think what we saw with Phoenix Children's is there was a set of sites that are very committed that couldn't make the first wave that I think will get in. And then I think there'll be a slow trickle after that. But yeah, so I think a majority of it is from inside, but I think what we want to do is if an idea comes to us and we say, wow, that's a great idea. How could, and they want to like get the leverage of these 18 sites that are already connected and add a 19th site to do a study, I think we want to be able to evaluate that.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Other questions on the front of the funnel? Okay. So the next phase, so you're coming in here on this sort of left-hand side is the investigator works with potentially a whole study team and the DCC to develop this into a protocol, and when they're ready, they submit it to the scientific review subcommittee for review. And the idea will be they're submitting a protocol, and we have the whole sort of what do you need to do for a protocol described within the SOPs. So if you have questions about it, you can look at that. And the scientific review subcommittee will meet, do a review, provide sort of scoring feedback in a to be determined rubric, but not unlike an NIH review with a little bit of PCORI mixed in, i.e. the sort of patient engagement, patient centeredness mixed in, and we'll probably leverage their rubric. The good part is we've got all of the infrastructure to do that for you, already set up, and they'll provide basically summary statements, and there's going to be sort of a detailed statement that goes back to the investigator, and then a higher level summary that goes to the executive committee. And then when the investigator is ready, they make any revisions based on the feedback, and they come and they present. They get, assuming they've scored well enough where I don't have it there. Pardon me one second. Let me look at my thing. So they, there's an iteration in here that I'm not capturing. I'm going to have to go back and look at my SOPs, but this conveys the overall sense. So the idea is that it then comes to a review of the research subcommittee after it's gotten a good sort of the go from the scientific review subcommittee, and it gets reviewed in front of the research steering committee. And it fits the same sort of idea of 50 to 69% approval. They can go back and revise. Lower than 50%, really not going to be considered. And 70% or better, it can move on to being finalized, which is work with the DCC and whatever we need to do to take it from a fully fleshed out protocol to being a complete application with, we'll have to have had done some, initial budget development, but really to take it to a final application. So that describes the sort of overall flow. I've got to go back and look at what comes out of the SRS because I'm forgetting that right now, and it's been a while since I wrote the SOP. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, this looks like quite a bit of work for the SRS chair, and also depending upon the skill set of the person who's the PI or the other investigators, could involve quite a bit of time of the DCC to be able to help them with the finalization of the protocol and the analysis section and things of that sort. So I just think we have to be aware of that.
Right. So I think this is, some of this will be a work in progress. I think, the PCORI grant is an example of the large side where, I clearly the ability to do, multiple large trials, is quite demanding when you think of the amount of work that went into that application. I think that there's going to be a range from registry studies that, we're already collecting the data for, and it's about doing an analysis of a question, to, being probably on the lighter end, to the extreme end of a 25-center trial. And I presume that there will be many, many things in between. But I think we're going to need to gauge the resources to do this and what we think the sort of odds are of success for sort of funding and whatnot, because we've got to be careful about how much resource we have to put into doing that interaction. So yes, I'm aware of that, but it's a very valid point, Susan.
Okay.
And the SRS chair role is another one. So I think what we're going to need to do is, say go, and then monitor, because I don't really suspect that we're going to be overwhelmed in the short term. But I think when we get ahead of speed about us in, say, a year or two, we could find ourselves saying, oh, we need to find a sort of a funding mechanism just to support our our pre-submission work level to support the investigators to build this. Okay, other questions or statements? It's a good thing that we can probably, Jacob, this would be a great question to ask of Sally Jo, because this is nearly exactly the PCARN process. And it would be great to know, because they have probably lots of data for how they manage their funnel, how much work is going into the prep phase versus the amount of work they're doing on funded research.
Yeah, I can follow up with that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on this? Let me make a note that I've got to go and check the SRS. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Paul, this is Christy. This may be too specific of a question, but I'm thinking of people within our current CPRN group and or outside who come forward with a concept, and some of the information they're interested in collecting may already be collected within what we're doing, and some may not. And I assume that would then be part of that whole process of whether that's something that, for the sites that choose to participate in, if the state moves forward and it's something we support and then goes to external funding, gets funding, and they come back and say, if you want to join, then your center is either currently collecting that outcome already or is willing to add it, correct?
Right. Or it's a funded portion. And I mean, I think we're going to have a limited number of outcomes that we're collecting as part of, clinical process. But
right.
You can certainly envision outcome measures where, especially to have the rigor of collecting them at a baseline and at a place down the road, that we're going to need funding support for that. And so I think that just gets built into, so there's going to be here's the base stuff that the registry collects as a function of clinical practice, and that that could be 60 or 70% of the data points that we need, but these applications will clearly have, and then here's the funded portion that we know we can't collect this without sufficient application funding.
Exactly. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Good question. Other questions? Okay. Then the idea is, after it's given approval to move on, there is one last sort of check before we submit, which is executive committee only. And so the idea being that the research steering committee, subcommittee, has the whole executive committee, and it has this community advisory component. But we would just want to give one last, so if we say go, then it gets finalized and developed. We just want to have one last sort of gate approval to say we submit. And submissions are going to go through the PI sponsoring institution. Most of those will have a very large, Utah DCC subcomponent for the data collection and analysis. But we envision those as being very much so like, say, the Kary grant in that case, and there'll be some that are based out of Utah, where the whole thing will go through, say, University of Utah. But to be clear, this is not envisioned that that the University of Utah is the sponsoring institution for all of these. It is a key leg in the stool, and in some cases the sponsoring institution. But it's really the work of the PI to have that underpinning of institutional support for getting the grant. Okay, questions on that? All right. Key things to be aware of or to give feedback on is that, so as I mentioned at the upfront part, the investigator committee votes on the concepts, because that is the key point where you as investigator are saying, I'm excited to have all my partners in our CP practice be participating in this. This is a good thing, or gosh, I really don't think this is where we should spend our time. And we will have, and we need to consider at some point, as the network gets larger, there are going to be studies that we say, yeah, we only need N sites for this. So there could be a vote that says, we're going to opt out of this, but we think it's a good study. We're not, because many of the sites don't have the same, not all sites have the same sort of discipline focus, and so you could see studies that just are not a fit for your site. So there'll be, both an abstention, it's fine, but not a fit for us, as well as a yes, this is a go. So the executive committee and the scientific review subcommittee and the community advisors that come together in that RSS have that sort of final vote, and that's part of our trying to have a good weighting of community centricity in what we're doing, so of patient centricity. And then the executive committee will just give the final go, no go, do we put all of our weight behind this. So I think we discussed the external PIs as just to kind of create the opening for getting access to the best science. Saw an example of this recently with HCRN, where there's a protocol going on in Europe for how they're dealing with kids with a bleed, a intraventricular hemorrhage in the NICU, and sort of a change to what HCRN does as a protocol in that case, where they're considering some degree of partnership to take that on and measure that outcome in a multi-center way, because they believe that there's benefit in partnering, and it could really prove the case and really move the field forward. So those are really the key ideas, and then clearly one of the things we'll have to assess, and Susan, this was a little bit of my response to your question. I think there are going to be many, like we were at the Research CP meeting, and Kary was giving an example of being able to track, I'm trying to remember what treatment and outcome it was over time that we would just have kind of longitudinally in the registry, and it's just a matter of sort of pulling the fields and doing the analysis. And so we'll have to look at, for those kinds of things, being able to say, oh, well, if we go out and get a $25,000 grant from Pedal with Pete, we can do this, or something like that, because we're already collecting the data. So, and I think we'll be able to provide some guidance in the long run. We have an example of this for working with Michael Kruer, and I don't know if I said this 2 weeks ago when we met, but on June 5th, Michael Kruer submitted a R01 with a not insignificant component that was a CPRN phenotypic analysis of registry data for the patients that he can enroll. So based on the style that we talked about when he presented back in May of CPRN sites would simply refer patients to Phoenix Children's. They would enroll them, consent them, and then they would kind of send us back their identifying information so the sites could help the DCC identify the patients that we need to do the phenotypic analysis. So we have a good sample of, like, to say, this is what it will cost for us to analyze this many data points. So we should be able to share more information about that down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any questions about the research concept process overall? Okay, manuscripts and publication. So much of the work for data access and manuscripts comes out of, you're only going to do these if you have a study, and so much of this gets thought about ahead of time in the study protocol. So, really got to look at the Chapter 4 is sort of the motherlode SOP because of its impact on data access and manuscripts. So, they'll really get approved there. And so the investigator committee is really going to continue to hold the sort of vote on that. But also there'll be many sort of, as we've discussed, ancillary analyses of study data or of the registry data or of the community registry, which we're actually getting, inching closer to being able to roll out. The final surveys are going into review with a survey expert at University of Utah. Jacob, when is that meeting? Is it this week or next week?
This Thursday, I think.
Yeah, so we're moving that forward, and the whole portal is set up and ready to go. And so as soon as we have that review done and the IRB approval, we'll be ready to start that longitudinal study of pain and social and emotional behavioral studies for adults that's been defined by Mary Gennady and Deb Thorpe and group. Anyway, so and the idea of this group is, again, journal-ready manuscripts, and so there's just the SOP just describes how this group will do a review, the kinds of things they're seeking to do, and what our authorship guidelines are, where we're really following the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors for the standard for whether or not someone is an author on a publication. We will have a bit more of a discussion versus, again, comparing to HCRN, the way things are done, where currently sort of every site is polled for who's making the biggest contribution to a given study to have the name on a manuscript. But with so many centers, the bar is going to be based on the contribution to the manuscript, and then a reference to the CPRN and the sites that are contributing data that went into the study. Any question on manuscripts and publication? Again, the SOP has more detail. Okay, I didn't put a slide together for the data access side of this, but the data access is really kind of like the manuscript. It all falls in the same realm of the protocol. I mean, there's not going to be data access that happens outside of a study question. There's not a oh, can you send me the registry as a subset, and I'm going to look for something that would support a hypothesis kind of work. The data stays in Utah. We are talking about potentially creating a sort of a public statement of our hypotheses, so that we make these and publish them first, and then our publications either prove or disprove those hypotheses as a good mechanism of rigor for what we're doing. So I'd encourage you to read Chapter 6, but I think it's kind of light in saying that you own your data for your site, and all the other data is at the University of Utah and stays at the University of Utah for analysis and then works with a investigator for the creation of the study and the manuscript. So any questions? Okay, well, I am going to take the input I've been given from both the executive committee and the questions asked here, review that, and I think we will publish our 1.0, or maybe it's 1.2 at that point, version of the SOPs, and open the doors. Christy, I'm looking forward to that study you were talking about last week. I think that would be a great one. But you know, we'll start. I'll start to put a request out for the most immediate thing that we need to form, which is the scientific review subcommittee, and look for someone to chair that and people to participate in the reviewing of grant ideas for that. Okay, that is it. Anybody have any? Go ahead.
Paul, can you wait maybe until next Monday before you put out the SOPs as version 1? The reason I'm suggesting that is that I've started going through them, but I haven't sent them to you. I've tracked a few suggested changes, and you might want to see those first. They're mostly typo type things.
Yeah, so Susan, I know I seem like I'm going to get all sorts of things done in light speed, but given the research CP stuff that needs to move forward, yeah, I will. I think people know enough that if they wanted to start to work on a concept, they could. But yeah, that's totally fine. I am not going to get anything out in a week's time. Just to be fair, it's probably more like August 1 or kind of time frame for me.
I'll do this before then. I'm doing it right now, but I just wanted to be sure I let you know I was doing it because it could be helpful.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. All right. Any other questions about network progress, registry, forms, extraction? Okay. Thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate it. Longer meeting today, and I will send out details later for the recording. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Thanks.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.